Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant meets U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd at the Pentagon. The minister speaking of projecting power together, discussing areas of disagreement as friends do, and standing strong together in the face of attacks, from missile attacks to diplomatic attacks on the global stage. Secretary Austin emphasizing that another war between Israel and Hezbollah could easily become a regional war with terrible consequences for the Middle East, and so diplomacy is by far the best way to prevent more escalation. Wikileaks founder Julian Assange is released from a British prison to fly to a U.S. territory in the Pacific Ocean, where he has agreed to plead guilty to a single espionage charge, no additional jail time, then fly to Australia, his home, and resolve a over decade-long legal battle related to his publication of U.S. classified documents dealing with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. House Rules Committee starts work on 3 national security spending bills for fiscal year 2025 for the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, and State. And President Joe Biden says if they were to pass the House and Senate and reach his desk, he would veto them because the funding levels do not follow an agreement he reached with House Republicans last year, and because of policy riders they added on issues such as abortion, diversity, equity and inclusion, and climate. National Transportation Safety Board holds a hearing in East Palestine, Ohio on the 2023 toxic train derailment to approve their final report on the probable cause of the accident and make recommendations for train safety improvements. We'll talk about it with E&E News reporter Mike Lee. U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy declares gun violence a public health crisis. And rapper Chuck D and country music star Lainey Wilson joined the State Department YouTube Global Music Partnership as ambassadors to use music to promote peace. Some headlines in the war between Israel and Hamas from the New York Times today. A UN-backed panel of experts said Israel's war in Gaza had created a catastrophic lack of food, but stopped short of declaring a famine in the territory. Israel's Supreme Court ruled that the military must begin drafting ultra-Orthodox Jewish men, a decision that threatened to split Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government amid the war in Gaza. And U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III and his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, were meeting on Tuesday in Washington to discuss the war with Hamas in Gaza and to address the intensifying conflict along Israel's border with Lebanon. That was from the New York Times. The secretary and the minister spoke before their meeting at the Pentagon. First, Secretary Austin.
I am extremely concerned about the rise in rocket attacks on Israel's north from Lebanese Hezbollah and the recent surge in tensions. Hezbollah's rocket attacks means more suffering for the more than 60,000 Israelis now displaced from their homes and for tens of thousands of displaced Lebanese. Hezbollah's provocations threaten to drag the Israeli and Lebanese people into a war that they do not want. And such a war would be a catastrophe for Lebanon, and it would be devastating for innocent Israeli and Lebanese civilians. Another war between Israel and Hezbollah could easily become a regional war with terrible consequences for the Middle East. And so diplomacy is by far the best way to prevent more escalation. So we're urgently seeking a diplomatic agreement that restores lasting calm to Israel's northern border and enables civilians to return safely to their homes on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border. And I look forward to working with you on this urgent issue, Mr. Minister. But Yoav, I want to also commend Israel for the comprehensive ceasefire and hostage proposal that it has offered, as outlined by President Biden and endorsed by the UN Security Council. The onus is on Hamas to accept this roadmap to a durable end to this war. And the failure of Hamas to accept this important proposal is prolonging the agony of Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians alike. Now, Israel recently conducted a daring operation to rescue 4 hostages unjustly held by Hamas in Gaza. And we won't rest until all of the hostages are safely home, including American citizens. But the only way to bring them all home is principled diplomacy. And we must not miss this moment, and we must not risk indefinite war and insurgency. Israel is in a hard fight, against a cruel and ruthless foe. But I learned firsthand that you can only win in urban warfare by protecting civilians. So Israel must continue to do more to protect Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now that's both a moral necessity and a strategic imperative.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon today, meeting with the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant.
Today we are at the crossroad, and that will impact the entire Middle East. I am here to discuss the ways to achieve our common goals, ensuring the security of the State of Israel and projecting the powerful ties between our countries. In Gaza, we must work together to ensure the return of 120 hostages, with no exception. We must end the terrorist regime of Hamas. In the north, we are determined to establish security, changing reality on the ground, and bringing our communities safely back home. We are working closely together to achieve an agreement, but we must also discuss readiness for every possible scenario. The greatest threat to the future of the world and the future of our region is Iran, and time is running out. Now is the time to realize the commitment of the American administrations over the years to promise to prevent Iran from possessing a nuclear weapon. Above all, we must discuss our extraordinary ties, projecting power together, discussing areas of disagreement as friends do, and standing strong together in the face of attacks, from missile attacks to diplomatic attacks on the global arena. Our friends and our enemies see this soon and understand our power. We have a lot to discuss, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much for having me.
The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant at a Pentagon meeting with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Story from Al Jazeera: an Israeli airstrike has killed 10 members of Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh's family in northern Gaza's Shanti refugee camp, according to the Palestinian group and the enclave's civil defense agency. Confirming the attack on the family and the number of the dead, Hamas said on Tuesday that it held the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden responsible for the continuation of the war of extermination against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. That was from Al Jazeera. Story from AP: senior UN officials have warned Israel that they will suspend the world body's aid operations across Gaza unless Israel acts urgently to better protect humanitarian workers, 2 UN officials said Tuesday. The ultimatum is the latest in a series of UN steps demanding Israel do more to safeguard aid operations from strikes by its forces and to curb growing lawlessness hindering humanitarian workers. That was from Associated Press. This came up today as AP reporter Matt Lee questioned the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
There seems to be a lot of concern that the UN is going to pull out of Gaza and not halt its relief assistance operations there. I understand there was some kind of a meeting that you guys brokered or tried or arranged yesterday to try to, figure out a way that they could keep operating. So what can you tell us about that?
I can't speak to a meeting yesterday from here. I can go back and work on details of that after the briefing, but I can tell you that this is an issue that we have been intensely focused on. Our special envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues, Lise Grande, has been working with the UN and with various Israeli government entities to try to figure out a way to allow UN workers to safely do their jobs and deliver humanitarian assistance. We have seen over the past few weeks a big backlog of humanitarian assistance at Kerem Shalom. So a lot of trucks that have made it to Kerem Shalom, but then have not made it out of Kerem Shalom into the Gaza Strip where they can deliver goods, and they largely haven't been able to move because of a breakdown in security on the ground. This isn't a breakdown in security where trucks are being shot by Hamas or by the IDF. It is just random looting and criminal gangs and criminal actors who have been attacking trucks. And so we have been working with the UN and Israel to try and find a solution to that problem, including such ideas as trying to make sure that UN workers have personal protective equipment, that they have radios and other communications equipment so they can communicate with each other and safely move around Gaza, and that work is continuing.
Okay, I'm sorry, you said that some of these trucks were being shut up by the IDF?
No, I said they are not. So when you come to say not, this is not, so, obviously we've had issues in the past where there have been deconfliction issues and you've seen strikes on convoys by the IDF, and you've had other incidents where convoys have been diverted by Hamas. That's not what the current problem is. The current problem is they're being attacked by criminal elements inside Gaza.
Okay, so where do things stand right now as far as you understand it?
So there is aid that is moving, both commercial trucks and then humanitarian aid that is moving from Kerem Shalom.
Is humanitarian aid on the commercial truck?
There's commercial trucks that include food and other humanitarian goods, but they're sold on the market, in the free market inside Gaza, and those have been moving.
Free market?
It is a free capitalist market for what's worth. There are markets in Gaza where these goods are sold. Okay. And there has been a fairly substantial amount of commercial activity, but that in no way accounts for all the need, because there are obviously a lot of people in Gaza who don't have access to money, don't have access to any way to pay for those goods. And so we need to see humanitarian assistance sustained too. And that has slowed out of Kerem Shalom because of this breakdown in activity. There still has been a fair amount of humanitarian assistance going into northern Gaza over the Jordan route, and stuff coming in from Ashdod, but there has been a problem in southern Gaza that we've been working to try to resolve.
I'll leave it to others to talk about the free market that exists in Gaza.
Questions to the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller from Associated Press reporter Matthew Lee at the State Department news conference today in Washington. From Voice of America, the European Union and Ukraine began membership talks Tuesday, a process that could take years and which Russia has historically tried to prevent. The talks come a decade after Russian troops seized the Crimean Peninsula to keep Ukraine from forming relationships with the West. In a post on the social media site X, after the EU agreed to talks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "Generations of our people are realizing their European dream. Ukraine is returning to Europe." Moldova is due to start EU membership talks later on Tuesday. Candidate country must align its laws and standards with EU policy on issues that include movement of goods, environmental concerns, and security. That was the story from Voice of America. The European Union President, Ursula von der Leyen, posted a video on X.
It is very good news that today the European Union opens accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. We stand at the threshold of a significant and transformative moment for these two countries and for our union. And we celebrate the values and principles that bind us together. The European Union has always been more than a political and economic union. It is a testament to our collective aspiration for peace, for security, for democracy, and for prosperity. The people of Ukraine and Moldova have demonstrated their unwavering commitment and determination to be part of this project. Even in a time of war and turmoil, they have started extensive reforms. They know that their journey will be rigorous and demanding. The accession negotiations are designed to prepare the candidates for the responsibilities of membership. And this is why there are no shortcuts. We embark on these negotiations in a strong spirit of openness, engagement, and commitment.
European Union President Ursula von der Leyen posting that video. All 27 member EU countries must agree to add new member states. And as for the timeline, the Voice of America article says that Turkey has been in accession talks for almost 2 decades without an outcome, and Ukraine is seeking membership by 2030, but must first complete dozens of institutional and legal reforms. Also concerning the war between Russia and Ukraine, Associated Press writes that the International Criminal Court said Tuesday it issued arrest warrants for Russia's former defense minister and its military chief of staff for attacks on Ukraine's power plants, the third time the global court has accused senior Russian leaders of war crimes. Wikileaks founder Julian Assange, writes the independent newspaper in Great Britain, is due to land on a remote island in the Pacific on Wednesday, where his long-running campaign to avoid extradition to the United States will formally end, and he finally will be a free man. The 52-year-old will appear before a judge in the U.S. territory of the Northern Mariana Islands to plead guilty to one charge after the U.S. dropped 17 other espionage charges against him. Having already served 62 months in jail, he will then fly to his native Australia to be reunited with his wife, 2 young sons, and other members of the family. Assange will plead guilty to an Espionage Act charge of obtaining and disclosing information of national importance. The charges against him stem from one of the largest publications of classified information in American history, which took place during the first term of Barack Obama's presidency. Assange was accused of conspiring with Chelsea Manning, a military intelligence analyst, to disclose tens of thousands of activity reports about the war in Afghanistan. Documents included unfiltered U.S. diplomatic cables that potentially endangered confidential sources, Iraq war-related significant activity reports, and information related to Guantanamo Bay detainees. That was reporting from The Independent. We go back to the State Department briefing with spokesperson Matthew Miller, who was asked about this but said he needs to wait until the judicial proceedings have finished before he answers.
I sort of expected you're going to say it's an ongoing judicial matter, but
you're going to ask anyway.
What was the value of, what was the importance for the United States of reaching a plea deal with him? Why was it important to settle this?
So you're right. It is an ongoing judicial matter, and so I am really limited in what I can say, where I can't really say anything about that. I know that the Justice Department has published court documents related to this case. I know he's scheduled to appear in court in the coming hours, and given that it is a pending case that is about to go before a federal judge, I think it's appropriate for me to not comment on the matter at this time.
Sure. I'll try a little bit more, but obviously he's an Australian citizen. Can you talk about the nature of discussions between the United States and Australia at the diplomatic level? How was this important to resolve for the sake of the alliance between the U.S. and Australia?
Again, I think while the matter is pending, it's important for me not to comment on it at all. Maybe tomorrow we'll have more to say, but I think today I should refrain from commenting and defer to the Department of Justice.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference. Former Vice President Mike Pence, a Republican, posting on X, Julian Assange endangered the lives of our troops in a time of war and should have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The Biden administration's plea deal with Assange is a miscarriage of justice and dishonors the service and sacrifice of the men and women of our armed forces and their families. There should be no plea deals to avoid prison for anyone that endangers the security of our military or the national security of the United States, ever. That was the post from Mike Pence. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, with this post, I'm relieved Assange is finally free and reunited with his family after years of wrongful persecution. Yet this plea deal sets a dangerous precedent, criminalizing journalism and damaging our First Amendment rights. The land of the free can and must do better. James Clapper was director of national intelligence when the Wikileaks publishing did happen of the U.S. classified documents. James Clapper was interviewed on CNN Monday night when the news broke of the plea deal.
This may come as a surprise to you, but I actually think this came out pretty well. I think critical to this was his plea of one count of espionage. I think the law enforcement community and the intelligence community wouldn't have bought into this without that. But he's served essentially 7 years of incarceration in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Was released from that, and then the Brits arrested him, and he did 62 months in jail, hard time in London. So he's sort of, paid his dues. I will say, contemporaneously, there's great concern about the revelations that he made at the time, particularly where it could have put at risk people or compromised sources and methods. That's always the thing that the intelligence community worries about.
Do we know that he has that hasn't happened? Is that why you feel this is it's ended up correctly or well, that we don't know that he's done that or it hasn't had that effect? Well,
there was a damage assessment done at the time, And there was concern, although I don't recall any direct proof that, for example, assets in Afghanistan and Iraq who were helping the United States were exposed. I think another issue here, speaking on behalf of the intelligence community, is you can't have a system where people on their own unilaterally decide, well, I just think it's okay to expose all this classified information when they've made a commitment to protect it. That to me is a very important principle to bear in mind here. But I'll end where I began. I think justice is served.
Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper on CNN Monday night. Associated Press out of Melbourne, Australia, reads Australian leaders cautiously welcomed an expected plea agreement that could set free Julian Assange, who was pursued for years over Wikileaks publication of a trove of classified documents. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said on Tuesday there was nothing to be gained by keeping the Australian incarcerated. Well, former Australian Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce spoke to reporters. A portion was posted on the Guardian newspaper website.
Do I think what he did was morally correct? No, it wasn't. But the issue for me is extraterritoriality. This was an Australian citizen. He was not a citizen of the United States. He was not in the United States when this felony, as what they said, was created. He did not steal the information. That was then Bradley Manning, who is now Chelsea Manning. He was not the first person to publish this information. That was a gentleman, I believe, the name of Doyle from Cryptomania, who first published it. And if the dissemination of this information is a crime, then every person where I now stand in the Parliament of Australia's fourth estate is on their way to the United States of America because you all printed it. And that creates massive confusions. I don't want a place in Australia where if I offend the Quran, I'm off to Riyadh. If I offend the Chinese Communist Party, I'm off to Beijing. Or an Australian citizen who offends a law in the United States is off to the United States, unless he's in the United States when he commits it. In that case, that's a completely different issue. But from what I read, and of course we're all very new to this, it's still a plea deal on a felony. As a plea deal on a felony, he has to be heard on the soil of the United States, and I read that may be Saipan Island. So we just got to be still cautious on how this proceeds because the end has not arrived.
Former Australian Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, that interview posted on the Guardian newspaper website, and the ex-site at Wikileaks posting a video of Julian Assange flying on a plane from Great Britain to the Pacific. And they write, imagine from over 5 years in a small cell in a maximum security prison, nearly 14 years detained in the UK, to this. For the privilege, Julian Assange must pay over $500,000 US. Please help if you can. And there's a link to a site for donations. This is Washington Today. Story from thehill.com. The White House has issued a trio of veto threats against the first set of spending bills the House is scheduled to vote on, dismissing each proposal as partisan bills put forward by Republicans. The White House published statements of administration policy Monday addressing House spending bills for the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of State. And the president, the White House writing, rather than respecting their agreement and taking the opportunity to engage in a productive bipartisan appropriations process to build on last year's bills, House Republicans are again wasting time with partisan bills that would result in deep cuts to law enforcement, education, housing, health care, consumer safety, energy programs that lower utility bills, and combat climate change and essential nutrition services. Administration argued proposals also included numerous partisan policy provisions with devastating consequences for reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, climate change initiatives, and diversity efforts. That was from The Hill. Before the bills get to the House floor, they will need to get a rule from the Rules Committee setting the parameters for floor consideration, how much debate time there'll be, what amendments can be offered. And the Rules Committee met today. Michael Burgess, Republican from Texas, is the chair.
In 2014, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates famously said that then Vice President Biden, he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Then 10 years later, in 2024, Secretary Gates lamented how the deterrent power of the United States has declined in the last several years and concluded, no one seems to be afraid of us. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that President Biden is the common denominator in this shocking turn of events. Indeed, his failed leadership has destabilized our geopolitical order and threatened our national security. From appeasing adversaries to opening the border, this president has eroded years of hard work in the name of a rather muddled worldview. House Republicans remain committed to shielding Americans from the worst consequences of this administration's warped priorities. This is why we are here today. The Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, State and Foreign Operations, all of those appropriations bills will recenter our priorities and improve our global and domestic postures and right-size the spending. I'd like to commend the Appropriations Committee for crafting legislation that responds to this administration's reckless approach while honoring the duty to the taxpayer. For decades, we all grew up on this. Peace through strength. It's served our country well. President Biden has abandoned that wisdom, and the state of the world today reflects the failure of that foreign policy. Everywhere you turn, our adversaries take advantage of the president's willingness to appease them.
Congressman Michael Burgess, Republican from Texas, chair of the Rules Committee at today's meeting to consider the rules for debate for the House floor for the three spending bills. Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, is the committee's ranking member.
When it comes to global leadership, we have a very different idea of what leadership looks like. After listening to your opening statement, I mean, we believe that Joe Biden has rebuilt America's standing in the world after Donald Trump ruined it, quite frankly. And it was Republicans, not Joe Biden, who held up aid to Ukraine for 9 months because their side buys into the Kremlin propaganda. It was a Republican president who went to North Korea, Mr. Chairman, who actually said after meeting with Kim Jong-un that we fell in love. Who says that? Donald Trump says that. It was a Republican president named Donald Trump who fawned over Vladimir Putin, who can't find enough superlative adjectives to praise people like Viktor Orban and every other dictator in the world. I'm glad that we have a president right now who is trying to rebuild America's image around the world and who is standing up for democracy, which is something that used to be a bipartisan value that we all were committed to protecting democracy, not only here in the United States, but helping to promote it and protect it around the world. But we are here today to consider three more extreme MAGA funding bills for fiscal year 2025.
Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, ranking member on the Rules Committee during today's meeting. Story from Politico. Former President Donald Trump has spent recent weeks claiming the Biden administration's climate policies will weaken the country's ability to wage war. At rallies and in media appearances, Trump has said electric tanks and fighter jets powered by sustainable fuels would cripple American military might and leave troops vulnerable to attack. At one recent event in Detroit, Trump said fighter jets using sustainable fuel would lead to defeat because they would be less efficient. That was from Politico. The Pentagon press secretary, Pat Ryder, was asked today about electric tanks.
All right, let me go to Jeff Shogel, Task and Purpose.
Thank you. Former President Trump has criticized the military for moving toward electric tanks. As far as you know, are there any plans for electric tanks?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Seeing those press reports, I'm not aware of any electric tanks. Certainly referring to the Army for any questions about their acquisitions programs. Just leave it there.
The Pentagon press secretary Pat Ryder, an Air Force Major General, at his news conference at the Pentagon. Factcheck.org has an entry from November 2023 about this claim from former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee for this year. And they write the military is moving toward the electrification of its vehicle fleet, starting with light-duty, non-tactical vehicles, citing not only environmental benefits but cost savings and operational advantages. As part of the military's climate strategy released in 2022, the military also aspires to move to fully electric tactical vehicles by 2050, but even that does not include combat vehicles such as tanks. That was from factcheck.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policies debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. Trains Magazine reports Norfolk Southern and its contractors should not have decided to vent and burn derailed tank cars carrying vinyl chloride 3 days after the February 3rd, 2023 derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, the National Transportation Safety Board said today. The 5 tank cars were among the 38 cars that derailed near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border after the catastrophic failure of a wheel bearing on a covered hopper car. The bearing was on fire but did not trigger critical alarms at 2 hot bearing detectors the train passed before reaching East Palestine, where the wayside detector alert came moments before the fiery derailment. During a public hearing this morning, the board's professional staff made 20 recommendations designed to prevent similar wrecks and to improve the emergency response to derailments involving hazardous materials. That was reporting from Trains Magazine. NTSB board member Michael Graham gave an opening statement at the hearing today in Ohio.
As we convene today to conclude our investigation into the train derailment in East Palestine, I want to begin by acknowledging the profound impact this incident has had on the community. To the people of East Palestine and the surrounding communities, we extend our deepest sympathies. We recognize the fear, disruption, and hardship you have endured. This board is committed to ensuring that your voices are heard and that your experiences help guide our pursuit of safety improvements on our nation's railways. I arrived with the NTSB investigative team on Saturday, February 4th. On Sunday, our command post was moved to the Unity Fire Station. When the team arrived, we were greeted by a volunteer firefighter who couldn't have been more than 18 to 19 years old. We started talking and quickly learned this young man was among the many firefighters who responded in minutes following the derailment. He told us about his experiences that night, receiving the call, quickly responding with his friends and fellow volunteer firefighters to protect their community, and the dangers they faced on the scene. Later, the firefighter's mother surprised us by bringing the NTSB investigative team a crock pot full of homemade sloppy joes, chips, and water for lunch. I'll never forget that. To me, the story of that mother and the son symbolizes the spirit, the resilience, and the character of East Palestine and the surrounding communities. In the wake of the immense tragedy, the community came together. Your strength and unity in the face of adversity has deeply moved us. Today, we present our findings mindful of the challenges faced by those affected. We are here to ensure that the lessons learned from this derailment will lead to meaningful change so no other community has to relive the challenges faced by the people of East Palestine. I also want to extend my deepest gratitude to our investigative team. Your dedication and meticulous work have been exemplary. Your efforts not only help us understand what went wrong, but pave the way for vital safety recommendations that, if implemented, will prevent similar accidents in the future and enhance the safety of our nation's railways. To the community of East Palestine, please know that your safety and well-being are at the forefront of our mission. Our work will not end with the issuance of the safety recommendations today, but rather we will continue to pursue and advocate for these safety recommendations until each one is implemented.
National Transportation Safety Board member Michael Graham. Mike Lee, reporter for E&E News, who covers the environment and energy issues, has been following today's NTSB hearing in East Palestine, Ohio, on the Norfolk Southern toxic train derailment investigation, and joins us now. Thank you for being on Washington Today. The headline in your article says that the investigation turned up a series of failures before the wreck and during the response. What are some of the findings?
A lot of the findings have been coming out over the last year. The NTSB found that the train was throwing off sparks, and then it was on fire for almost 20 miles before the wreck actually happened, and that Norfolk Southern's detectors that are supposed to find that problem didn't catch it. That was one of the main ones. There's also some long-standing concerns, like going back for decades, about the design of some of the tank cars that were in this wreck.
You also write the railroad withheld information.
Yeah, and that again is something that came up last year. What's interesting about that, there was testimony last year that Norfolk Southern didn't tell the local fire chief, apparently all the information about that he might have wanted to know before he authorized Norfolk Southern to basically blow up some of these rail cars to prevent a bigger explosion. At the time, there was that was still in dispute. What we're hearing today is that the NTSB is kind of coming down and determining what they think the facts are. And I'll tell you, Norfolk Southern disagrees with it. But that was a really crucial decision, because the big, the huge plume of smoke that people saw over East Palestine on their TV news and in the newspapers was the second explosion, the one that Norfolk Southern touched off to prevent what they thought was going to be a bigger explosion.
Today, the agency will be approving their final report and making recommendations for safety changes. What happens next?
It can vary. If you've been following the hearing the way I have, the folks who've testified have pointed out that they've been asking for some of these changes for decades and still haven't got them. So, the way the NTSB works is they don't have the authority to order companies to change what they're doing. They make recommendations, and then the other government agencies, which actually do the regulation, can adopt those and force the railroad industry to change. But on some of these issues, like the older model tank cars, the NTSB has been saying since 1991 that the design of some of the tank cars that were in this wreck was dangerous. And they pointed out that a couple of the older model cars broke and caused a fire. The newer model cars didn't break, and that from the NTSB's point of view, that makes their argument that the older model cars ought to be off the rails.
There have been some proposals for enhancing railroad safety introduced in Congress. What new laws might be needed, and what's the status of those bills?
The main bill in Congress is kind of in limbo right now. The two senators from Ohio, backed by the two senators from Pennsylvania, which is very close to where this wreck happened, introduced a bill that would require three-person crews on most freight trains, or two-person crews on most freight trains. It would require updated monitoring on things like the hot bearing detectors that we talked about, and some other changes. That bill has basically been stalled. It hasn't even gotten a hearing in the House of Representatives. Another thing that came up today during the NTSB meeting was the need for funding for things like training volunteer fire departments, because the folks that responded to this wreck were all volunteers.
The NTSB board chair, Jennifer Homendy, and some of the board members made sure today to talk directly to the people of East Palestine, Ohio, saying that they're still there, they're still hearing their concerns. But where does that stand? The cleanup, the compensation, what the people have gone through, and what they still need?
A lot of that's still going on. The company has paid several $100 million to settle lawsuits by folks who live in the vicinity. The cleanup is still going on. They're still being investigated by different government agencies. So, we could see more action there.
Mike Lee, reporter for E&E News. His beat is environment and energy issues. You can find his stories at enenews.net or politico.com, and on X, he's at Mike Lee FW. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 299, NASDAQ up 220, S&P up 21. From Reuters, a U.S. judge on Tuesday rejected a $30 billion antitrust settlement in which Visa and MasterCard agreed to limit fees they charge merchants who accept their credit and debit cards. Many merchants and retail trade groups opposed the accord, saying fees would remain too high and that Visa and MasterCard would retain too much control over how card transactions are handled. The decision could force Visa and MasterCard to negotiate a settlement more favorable to merchants or go to trial. That was from Reuters. The U.S. Surgeon General, writes CBS News on Tuesday, declared gun violence a public health crisis driven by the fast-growing number of injuries and deaths involving firearms in the country. The advisory issued by Dr. Vivek Murthy, the nation's top doctor, came as the U.S. grappled with another summer weekend marked by mass shootings that left dozens of people dead or wounded. That was from CBS. The Surgeon General posted a video.
Hello, I'm U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. Today, for the first time in the history of our office, I am issuing a Surgeon General's advisory on firearm violence. It outlines the urgent threat firearm violence poses to the health and well-being of our country. As a doctor, I've seen the consequences of firearm violence up close in the lives of the patients I've cared for over the years. These are moms and dads, sons and daughters, all of whom were robbed of their physical and mental health by senseless acts of violence. Unfortunately, the problem has continued to grow. 54% of adults in America report that they or a family member have experienced a firearm-related incident, whether they've been personally threatened with or injured by a firearm, lost a family member, witnessed a shooting, or shot a firearm in self-defense. Many of these harms are disproportionately felt in our communities. Black individuals endure the highest rates of firearm homicides, while suicide rates are highest among veterans, older white individuals, and younger American Indian and Alaska Native people. What is especially devastating is how this has affected our children. Firearm violence has become the #1 cause of death among children and adolescents, more than car accidents or drug overdoses. I've sat with parents who've lost a child to firearm violence. I've listened to their stories and felt their pain as they describe the holes in their hearts. As a father, I know a parent's worst nightmare is to lose a child, to feel like you can't protect your child from harm.
U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy posting that video. The New York Times article about this declaration reads that Dr. Murthy's 32-page advisory calls for an increase in funding for firearm violence prevention research, advises health workers to discuss firearm storage with patients during routine medical visits, and recommends safe storage laws, universal background checks, red flag laws, and assault weapons ban, among other measures. A State Department announcement this week of a partnership with YouTube. The press release reads it's in support of the department's Global Music Diplomacy Initiative, a worldwide effort to elevate music as a diplomatic platform to promote peace and democracy in support of the United States' broader foreign policy goals. At the core of the partnership is a roster of U.S. global music ambassadors, which builds on the legacy of the iconic jazz ambassadors of the 1950s and 60s and promotes peace across generations of people worldwide. That was from the press release from the State Department. 2 of the inaugural ambassadors were at the launch on Monday at the State Department, including rapper Chuck D.
Today I was reminded, Lloyd just said, and yourself and Lloyd said, about the jazz ambassadors who stepped forward during a time of great divide. You're talking Louis Armstrong, you're talking about Ella Fitzgerald traveling around the world in DC-7s, when they were 50 or 60 years old, so we're pretty sure we have it balanced out now. With great energy, the civil rights movement here in the USA and the Cold War globally, to travel and engage the world on behalf of the USA people. And I know, and if they could navigate those challenging times, then so can we. Agreed?
Yes.
Now, It's the time for us all, as USA, American, and music artists, songwriters, and producers to step up and do our part. By sharing our talents, our time, our understanding of the real connections that we can make through music and culture, that we can not only engage younger generations, and how young is young right now, right? Young could be under 40, who will be and who already are our future leaders, and also encourage peace in the communities and countries worldwide.
Chuck D, rap artist at the State Department on Monday, referred to Leor, that's Leor Cohen, YouTube Global Head of Music. Also there was the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and another U.S. Global Music Ambassador, country music star Lainey Wilson.
While I was visiting Germany earlier this year, my sister called from back home in Louisiana, and she said, "Can they even understand a word that you're saying over there?" I said, "Well, shoot, they can't even understand me at home. I mean, no matter where I go, there's a language barrier." But all that to say, I mean, that's the power of music, and that's the power of storytelling. It truly does transcend language barriers. While I was in Amsterdam, half the crowd was singing in English, and half the crowd was singing in Dutch. And I learned my lesson about watching their mouths while I was singing, because I was about to start speaking Dutch and didn't even know I could. But what I have learned from traveling the world and playing music is we're all actually a lot more alike than you think. And we have so much in common, and to tell you the truth, I mean, that gives me a whole lot of peace. I am so proud and honored to be a U.S. Global Music Ambassador, and I give you my word that I'll keep using my gift to try to bring as much peace to the people as I possibly can. God bless you.
Country music artist Lainey Wilson at the State Department on Monday. The other inaugural U.S. Global Music Ambassadors are Herbie Hancock, Jelly Roll, Kane Brown, Teddy Swims, Justin Tranter, Armani White, Breland, Denise Graves, and Grace Bowers. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word to get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.